So I have a lot to thank Carissa and Sonia for. I'm almost 50, and I was born with autism. I had colic from the get-go. I rocked, I droned, I chewed everything in sight. I ate my baby blankets, I ate my toys, I ate my dolls. I chewed the vinyl piping off all of the chairs in the kitchen, and off all of the seats in our family car as well. Anything that was vaguely chewy went in my mouth, because when I chewed, I would take some of the stress off the inflamed membranes in my skull. And that would back things off just a little bit. And as long as I was sucking or chewing, I could ease off the pain inside my head a little bit. Now, it's been really cool working with Sonia and Carissa, because Sonia deals with adults who have hormonal and toxicity challenges. And of course, oh, I got it the wrong way around. Sonia deals with autistic children. I guess you could call me a child in some ways still, but anyway, between the two of them, Carissa and Sonia, I'm seeing some very, very interesting changes that have been just delightful. But, I mean, how did I find Sonia and Carissa, and how am I standing in front of you today? Because when I was a kid, you did not, if you wanted your kid to do well, you did not have them diagnosed, because if they were diagnosed, the pressure to institutionalize was huge. So, you know, how did I get here? Well, at age 11, I discovered that life could be an awful lot less painful and confusing than I had experienced up to that point in time. I actually got a chance to spend a single month, 28 days, at a wilderness canoe tripping camp in Northern Ontario. And this was revolutionary, because over the course of those 28 days, my cognitive function started climbing and climbing and climbing. It was easier to learn, it was easier to remember. I didn't have such a delay in reaction time. My emotional volatility, which had been just nuts before that, it's kind of like you as a person get picked up by the big, dog that is your emotions, and it just shakes you around when you're autistic. It's as though you have no say whatsoever. You're the dog's toy. And here's my emotional volatility when I arrive, and it's smoothing out through that month. And then there's the whole physical pain piece. Pain in muscles, pain in joints, pain in the head, pain in the gut. I didn't even know as an 11-year-old that you could actually eat food without hurting. I just thought that digestive pain was a constant thing, and I had no idea it wasn't normal. So I asked the girls in my cabin, does your belly hurt when you eat? What are you talking about? And I'm like, okay, there's something else to just completely shush about, because of course you suppress all of your symptoms, you suppress every way that you're different that you can, in order to not shame people. Because of course at that point in time, refrigerator mom was a big deal. And it was your parents' problem. I mean, your parents were the problem if you were misbehaving at that point in time. Now, here I am, my pain levels are dropping, my emotions are smoothing out, my cognitive function is getting better, and then I go home, and within 2 days, everything comes back. Oh, it's this crunch on me, and I learned something. Before then, I would have maybe one morning out of 10 days that I could think clearly. What happened when I got back was my environment is affecting my cognitive function, my emotional stability, my physical pain levels, and my capacity to make friends. Am I motivated? I am really motivated. I'm 11. I want friends. I don't want to be attacked all the time in the schoolyard. I don't want to be the last person chosen for everything. I don't want to be shunned. So I turned my life into a science project. And I started testing out, okay, what helps, what hurts, when, and then why? Why did my function increase so slowly and decrease so quickly with that 1 month of being away somewhere incredibly clean? So, I mean, the rest of my life has been driven by that moment, but that wasn't the only moment. There was another moment because, you know, that realization took me through science track in high school and then 2 years of pre-meds at Queen's University and a really bad realization in second year of pre-meds. My house backed onto a house that had 4 med students and we shared a laundry between the 2 houses. So, you know, lots of conversation, asking lots of questions, and I realized that all of the things that were helping me were not part of their picture in med school at all. And the things that they were studying were things that I had already figured out were part of the problem. When your reactions times slow to about 8 to 11 seconds, when you have a single ordinary Tylenol, you know that you're not reacting well to drugs. When you have every side effect in the book, plus some, and you're not getting the expected results from that drug, you know you should not be doing drugs. So I kind of went, oh my gosh, what do I do? And so I took a couple years off and did lots of reading, did some traveling, tried to figure things out, discovered something very interesting. When you don't pick up the social cues of your own culture, and you travel in countries that speak another language, they don't expect you to pick up those social cues, and you can actually get along with people much better than you can in your own culture, which is pretty fun. So, you know, I ended up going back to school in environmental studies because environment seemed to be really key. And I'm still trying things out, testing things. And about this time, there was a nurse in my family who handed me a book about pervasive developmental disorders and a couple of articles about autism and computing. And I was laughing. I've read these and I'm going, that's me they're talking about, that's me. And she said, yeah, I thought you'd find this interesting. Now, she hadn't seen my life before age 13, but just from the bits that she had seen, she knew what was going on. So here I am in environmental studies, and they have complementary health care as part of the student health plan. And boy, was that exciting. You know, I maxed out every year I was at university, trying out every different therapy I could get my hands on and doing the medical research. I started reading the medical journals in high school, and once I received that information about autism, I thought, okay, I've got to figure this out. Dove in and started looking at the autism research. Well, boy, was I flummoxed, because they had the symptoms down pat, but boy, were they off base in their therapies. Because everything they were talking about, I was looking at and going, well, that's not going to work. And I was really confused. So I thought, well, let's see what other autistics have to say about it. So I started looking. Surely there are other people out there who've emerged from the fog the way I have, and who are also figuring things out. And I started reading what they'd written, and I realized that their experiences were common with mine, and that they also were not getting the help that they needed from our social health care in Canada. So I thought, okay, I want to actually meet other adult autistics, and here is my defining moment number 2. Defining moment number 2 was deciding that I was going to go to this autism support group meeting that I'd seen in the paper. And this is a big deal because it's hard for me to do things that are strange and involve a lot of change and unknowns. But I went, okay, I'm really motivated, I'm going to do it. Well, autism support group meeting, right. I assumed I was going to be meeting other autistics because I have a literal mind. This is part of autism. I show up, and it's about the worst environment you can imagine for an autistic to show up in, because there's flickering fluorescent lights, and there's cinder block walls that are echoing everything. And you know the chairs that have the metal on the bottom that squeal every time you move them? And the center of the table, they have coffee. Oh, caffeine. I had half a cup of coffee once. Never again. They had milk, and they had cookies, and they had chocolate. And I'm looking at this going, okay, dairy, gluten, caffeine, sugar. Is there anything here that would actually make things worse for me? You know, do they want me to be able to participate in this meeting? Well then, you know, people are introducing themselves, and there's this scent wafting around the room, and I'm getting nauseous, and sensory distortions are starting to happen because, of course, there's hormones and neurotransmitter mimickers in a lot of our scent fragrances. And they're saying, so, how old's your kid? And I'm like, I don't have any kids. And they're like, well, why are you here? And I said, well, isn't this an autism support group meeting? And they said, well, yeah. And I said, well, don't you have autism? At which point, it turned into the most grueling grill session that I have ever been through, because they could not quite figure out that I had driven there, and that I had paid my own way through university, and that I was functioning to the degree that I was in that room with them. And what it made me realize was that all this stuff that I put together about what helped and what hurt was not readily available to the people who needed it most. It was there in the research, because I was finding it more and more and more over time. Little teeny bits here and there, mostly about the symptoms, not about autism itself. But if you track the symptoms, you were finding things. But no one was translating it into, well, you know, so what implications does that have for your kitchen? And how do you actually get rid of plastics? So I started, you know, networking with other adults in the autistic spectrum. One of the reasons that it's as clear now that sensory issues are part of autism is that the four of us did a whole bunch of hospitals and child development center talks back a while ago. And what kind of evolved from that, it was a program for helping families, for helping educators, for helping health practitioners, for helping other adults in the autistic spectrum identify what are the lifestyle changes that really make a big difference and why. And so what I do really dovetails with what Sonia and Carissa and a lot of other natural health practitioners are doing, because I'm the person who you can send your grandmother to and say, you know, my child needs these things, but it's going to take me a lot of time to explain them. There are parents who brought their moms and dads to my courses. There are teachers who brought their colleagues to my courses, because what I'm able to do is give them that inside look, not just from my own experience of autism, but from years of networking with other people who have this experience of emerging from the fog. So what I'm going to be talking about today, in the breakout session coming up, is what helps, and why does it help, and to some extent, how does it help, so that you get an understanding, a better understanding of why your naturopath is asking you to go in these directions. Because sometimes they don't have time to explain everything. And sometimes you need that explanation in order to say, oh gosh, wow, I really do need to get rid of gluten and dairy. So here's just one more story for you about gluten and dairy. When you're in the autistic spectrum, you have a lot of inflammation in your body, and you accumulate a lot of toxic products in your body. And the longer you have to sit still in any situation, the more those accumulate, and particularly in your extremities, in your hands, and in your feet, in your forearms, in your calves, and that builds up into this toxic ache sludge. And that ache gets bigger and bigger the longer you have to sit still. So when I had to do car trips, as a child, I would dissociate. I would just leave my body, and you know, people would get upset with me because I wasn't responsive. Well, I couldn't stay in my body, it was too painful. So as an adult, you gotta drive, you gotta pay attention, so you can't dissociate. Well, I knew that I was in trouble if I ate any gluten, if I ate any casein, and if I ate any stimulants like theobromine, which is in chocolate. But what I realized was that if I wanted to stay present and able to drive while I sat still and things accumulated in the extremities and the ache would go up and up and up, I needed to be able to stay right there in the moment. And so I got hooked on Timmy's brownies. Now Timmy's brownies, most people talk about brownies and they're meaning a different kind of brownie. Well, let me tell you what Timmy's brownies do to me. Well, you've got the casein and the gluten. When your gut doesn't break them down right, you've got opiate sequences floating through your bloodstream. Well, what does that do? Opium. Well, it's a relaxant and, oh yeah, it makes you high. Well, then I got the theobromine. And the theobromine is a stimulant. So I'm doing an upper and a downer and I'm driving. I have no clue that this is what I'm doing because I hadn't bumped into the biochemistry yet. When I did, I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta stop doing this. But I can really walk you through what things feel like. And this is part of why it's been so fun working with Chris and Sonia, is that, you know, they say, oh, try this, tell us what happens. And I'm like, oh, you wouldn't believe it, you know? I tried the liposomal glutathione and all the sutures on my skull stopped hurting all the time. And this is kind of what happened cognitively. And they're like, oh, yeah, tell us more. So anyway, it's been great. Thank you.